This conversation is a little different because it's almost like a story time. But this statement that subbing is making me hate teaching is a complex statement. Yesterday was the second or third time that I think I've said it in the past month or two, and that's why I'm deciding to talk about it and bring it up. Because I said it to individual people, and I put it on my Snapchat yesterday when I was really feeling it. And from the first time that I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Subbing and teaching are very different things, and mainly this conversation is going to be about that. I don't want to get into the specifics of yesterday too much. Some of it's necessary to highlight kind of why I was feeling that way, but I don't want to get into the whole story because then that'll just dominate everything, and I'll go really off the rails more than normal if I do that, which I just did after recording this for about a half hour, realizing I need to start again. So, why is that statement complex? It's complex because teaching and subbing are very different things. And I know they're very different things. But when I was feeling that feeling of like, oh my goodness, like subbing is just going to make me hate teaching, or it is making me hate teaching, it was the fact that obviously they're both in the same setting. They're both with these same students in the same classrooms, in the same schools, and the system is the same. It's just how you approach that time you spend with them that is so incredibly different. The job is so incredibly different in itself, yet all of these surrounding environments and things are the same. So I'll get into those differences. Like I said, that's kind of the main thing I think I want to talk about here. But it's just, it's hard not to relate the two when they're so closely related. Yet the job in itself is so different to me. So for some context, if you don't already know, I moved here a little over 3 years ago and I was offered a position on the sub list. I subbed from October until May that first year. And then in May, I got a contract to finish out the rest of the year full time in my dream position, which was high school art. I was teaching Art 10, Art 20, Art 30, and Art IB. Not that first semester, but I was covering a medical leave, and that teacher was not healthy enough that next year. So they invited me back. I taught that next year, full year, full time, and taught all those classes, 10, 20, 30, and IB. Dream position, dream school culture and context. It was very similar to the school that I interned at in Saskatoon. It was just a perfect scenario. I loved it. It was just magical. So after that full year, the teacher that I was in for was well enough to come back part-time. So then now we're getting into 2019. So 2019, wait, where are we here? 2019? No, that would have been 2018, sorry. I started off the school year as part-time, and then when we got into 2019, the semester ends at the end of January, and that is when they took over full-time for the new semester. So right now it's been a year and a month since I have been just back on the sub list. And I'm on two sub lists. I'm in two different school districts right now subbing. And yeah, so for the last year and a month, I have been subbing again. And I don't know if it's, I don't know if I really do have less patience or why. There's a couple different reasons maybe. One is that I was teaching for a while and that was just a dream and amazing. And having this thing going from subbing a little bit to teaching a whole bunch and then back to subbing, I think part of my patience or whatever is the fact that I just want to be in the classroom in a teaching context again, not subbing. Subbing is not very fulfilling, I would say the majority of the time. 75% or more of the time, it is not fulfilling the same way teaching is. Even on a good day, I'm just there for a day or two, or in some cases, the most I've been there for someone is 4 full days, or I guess it was kind of 3.5 because Friday was a half day, but 3.5 days or 4 days. And that was even in a context of doing some actual teaching. It wasn't just busy work and supervising and being what they call a warm body in the room, which is sometimes all their teacher needs in a sub, or what they say they need sometimes, but that's something we can talk about in a bit. Even so, in this context, it was the school I was familiar with, the classes I was familiar with, the students, everything. Yet it was not very fulfilling. One, I mean, just the material I was teaching wasn't something that we could have much conversation about. But also, at the end of the day, it's just not teaching. It's not the same thing. So even on the best teaching days, And days like today, I was engaged in conversation. There was back and forth. It was really great. It's what I love about teaching. It was just for that one day. You don't build a huge relationship with students, even if you're at that school subbing for that teacher, what I would call frequently. That frequency might only be once or twice a month. That's pretty frequent for a teacher to be gone, though, once or twice a month, and then having you come in there, like, so, or in some cases it was like I was there, 3-4 days in that month, and then I wasn't there again for another month, and then I was there one day, and then whatever. It's just not that easy to build relationships with students, and that's one of my favorite things about teaching. So, part of, the way that I've been feeling lately when I've had bad days subbing is partly because I had this other experience. I went from subbing, really thrown into it, not knowing what was going on, just trying to catch myself on my feet, and from there, just boom, into teaching, being like, oh, what is going on here? Getting used to teaching a little bit, really amazingly, just having an amazing time, enjoying it, enjoying the challenge, embracing the challenge, feeling good about the challenge, back to subbing where the challenges are not the same challenges, and they're not challenges that I look forward to or like. And that kind of makes a difference. I mean, life is, pushing me in a certain way that I don't want to be pushed, I guess, and that's okay. Like, I should still, it's hard for me to embrace certain challenges, I guess, like challenges that I would never want. I mean, that's like if I, blew a tire on the highway, it's like, well, I don't need this challenge. I know how to change a tire. This is just annoying. Like, this is just really frustrating. I didn't foresee this happening. I didn't want this to happen. It didn't need to happen. And I don't know how enriching it's going to make my life. This is a side quest that popped up and blew up in my face, and now I've got to fix it. And I don't think I'm going to feel much better after doing that. I mean, triumphing. Why does that word not sound good coming out of my mouth? Anyway, over any challenge should feel good. But I mean, there's other challenges. Like I said, with teaching, there's challenges that I know what those challenges are for the most part, and I embrace them, and I want to work on them, and they're still difficult. They're still not easy. They're still not fun all the time, but they're necessary. With subbing, the challenges there are not necessary because I'm not trying to be a career sub. So trying to figure a lot of these things out and try to figure out how to, one, have better classroom management skills, or how to just keep calm at the end of a day or whatever. Like, there's certain things these aren't fun challenges. Some of them are just like, yeah, how do I operate myself, let's say, in a grade 3 classroom? Well, I don't want to be in a grade 3 classroom. I would never accept a teaching position in a grade 3 classroom. It just wouldn't happen. So trying to figure out how to do that, and that challenge every time I get that opportunity, which is very few and far between, that I'm given that opportunity or accept that opportunity, that challenge is just an unwelcome one that I personally just don't find the joy in attempting to overcome. So anyway, different challenges. I've already gone off the rails, and now I don't know where I was. But that might be one reason as to why coming back to subbing, the harder days are harder for me to deal with, and why it's just, getting more difficult, and I have less patience and get stressed out or anxious get more frustrated. Part of it is also just not having a job. Well, I mean, that's kind of related, not having a teaching job. For the longer and longer that I don't have it, the longer that I stay on the sub list, those things happen. I don't know what else. Maybe other stressors going on in my life, but I feel like I've been more patient and more understanding and better at having conversations in my personal life and whatever else outside of work in the past 6 months. I feel like has been improving, but in the work life, I have less patience with certain scenarios. So let's get some obvious things out of the way, and we'll get into this discussion of the difference between subbing and teaching. Like I said, so that statement, again, is a complex statement. It's not 100% to be taken on face value. Subbing is not making me hate teaching because they're two different things, but they are in the same environment. The job in itself is incredibly different, but the environment is exactly the same. Like, the responsibilities are different. The challenges are different, but the students, are there. The classroom is there. The setup, the system, it's all exactly the same. It's just everything else is different about it, and it's a huge difference in my mind. However, it makes me just feel like, to be more accurate, it's more being scared of teaching in the future than it is hating teaching in the future. I mean, obviously, if I'm associating my subbing experience to what teaching will be like, then that's what makes me feel like, man, I hate teaching, or like I don't want to teach anymore, or whatever. When really I know that it really is about the subbing part of it. But those associations are made, and I think you can appreciate that from the environment being the same. So, teaching has so much different stuff going on. The responsibilities are incredibly different. You may have clubs like I did that run extracurricular activities, things that have nothing to do with the actual inside the classroom stuff. Whether, just helping out school events, depending on what kind of teacher you are, you're helping out with certain activities, being the art teacher, and I had like an art nerds club and a regular nerd club, and then we had the GSA going on, and like so the school's trying to organize activities. They wanted us to sometimes paint things for we had like a picnic type thing, like whatever. There's all these responsibilities that have nothing to do with actually teaching in the classroom. You've got admin you've got to report to, you've got reports you have to make, you've got parent-teacher interviews, you've got marking and stuff in the classroom to keep track of. You've just got a lot of things besides just the teaching portion that are attached to it, and it's an incredible amount of work, but it's very fulfilling. And my favorite thing, or one of my favorite things about teaching, is building relationships with students. So that is one thing that is, other than those responsibilities that make teaching different than subbing, building relationships with students is something that happens over time. Having good classroom rapport is something you can do as a sub, depending on your demeanor and stuff, and how you are with new people. I'm not very good with new people. Unless it's a one-on-one circumstance, then I can talk to people much better. But generally, I'm not good at networking events or socializing with multiple people that are new. I get overwhelmed, I get anxious. I don't like meeting new people unless it's in a very controlled environment and it's, like I said, like a one-on-one discussion or conversation. That I'm pretty comfortable with. I enjoy it a lot. I like learning about these people. I like drawing connections between us and seeing how we relate to one another and coming away with being inspired or learning something new and kind of reflecting on my own life and all those things. I love conversation. But that's not really the case when you go into a group of 30 plus students, or even if it's 10 plus students, which almost never happens. But I mean, even then, it's just not the same environment. You're there to do a job, the job that someone else left you to do, that you have to enforce, that they don't think they need to respond to, that's foreshadowing, but that's kind of what that position is. I don't really get a great chance to build a relationship with a student in a 1 hour period. I may never see them again for so many different reasons. They may transfer, I may never get called back to that school or that classroom, whatever might happen, right? I may never see them again. Some subs, I think, can have good classroom rapport just because their general demeanor and stuff is very inviting, or they are quote-unquote nice, very nice, and they have like a very extroverted personality, and they can just engage students, and that's some nature, and that also is some nurture. I think it is a skill that you can build and develop. However, I don't have much interest in developing that skill. It is in my best interest as a sub, but the thing is that it would be really fake for me. I just don't engage students that way. Mine is more genuine and sincere, and for me that comes with the long term of actually getting to know students, and students getting to know me, and knowing who I am and the things I care about and my standards and values and what I appreciate and everything like that. It's not something that I can just be like, hey everybody, and just play this extroverted clown character or whatever, or just this really nice person that, it's just, sometimes it lacks a real sincerity, because you're not going to get to know that student. You may never see them again, and you can't do that with every student in an hour anyways. Build a genuine relationship. It's just not going to happen. So again, it would be in my best interest to have a good classroom rapport, which would lead to respect and whatever else, and good classroom management skills. But it's just really difficult for me to put on a face and just jump into a classroom as an extrovert, which I'm not, and then try to engage students in this really insincere way. So that leads to some trouble for me. But again, no matter what, I would not have the opportunity to build a genuine relationship with a student in an hour. Fortunately, there are some schools I get called to again and again and again by certain teachers. They request me, and over the course of a semester, when they're teaching that one class, I may be able to build a relationship with some of those students, and that happens from time to time as a sub. That I get called back, and then for one reason or another, certain students and I or I can build a general classroom rapport that's genuine because they get to know me a bit. But even there's some students that I can kind of connect with a little bit. Now, I've had some of my favorite moments have just been when students entrust me with personal information, because to me it's feedback on the fact that, this student could be failing my class. Sometimes the students weren't even taking my class as a teacher, but they believed that I was a person that they could trust. And to me, that was a sign that I was doing something right. That was, I say it's a favorite moment just because it's feedback for me being like, wow, like I did connect with a student, I did build a genuine relationship. I didn't know how strong that was for them, and I'm glad I could be here as a safe space for that person. That's one of my favorite things about teaching. I think it's a very valuable thing, and it makes me feel good, and I like that I can be the person to assist somebody in whatever that thing is, whether it's just listening or helping them come up with a plan or whatever. That's not something that has ever happened to me as a sub. So again, building genuine relationships, that's just this magical thing to me as a teacher that is my favorite thing that I love about teaching. That doesn't happen as a sub. The other thing that I love about teaching is obviously teaching my subject area of choice, and that is visual art, and in higher levels that we can get into some conversation. I love seeing people learn and grow over time. I love seeing them go from me challenging them to them challenging themselves. I love to see concepts get realized, people latching on to concepts, the aha moment that they grasp a concept. Those are all things that I really, really love in teaching my subject area. That has nothing to do with the personal relationship necessarily, but it's more just about teaching the subject matter in a way that I can get through to some students, get some critical thinking going, again, have conversations about stuff. That is stuff I don't get an opportunity to do subbing very often. Every once in a while, a teacher will leave me with some sub-plans that involve actually teaching or lecturing and introducing material and having conversations with them. And it's, something that I'm interested in and sometimes knowledgeable about, and I can actually bring something to the table with my knowledge or expertise or what have you. And then the children see that and they respond to that, and we can have a good discussion sometimes. So those times are very rare with subbing, and that's another reason why, the thing I love about teaching, it doesn't happen with subbing. Now, the other thing is that when you are teaching, you're in control in a lot of ways. You control their mark, kind of, but not. I personally believe that students need to be taught at an earlier age to take responsibility for their own education, because it takes way too long for students to realize sometimes, or if they ever realize, that they are in control. They are in control of their actions. So whether that action is studying for a test or deciding to skip or to show up to class at all or to do the work in class or to do it after, how they behave, I don't control those things. I evaluate those things, and unfortunately I have to assign a numerical value to a lot of those things. So someone shows me with their actions that they understand the concepts that I have been teaching, and I assign a numerical value to their understandings of those concepts, is basically how that works. Their behavior is not something that I can assign a numerical value to. It's whether or not they have achieved an understanding of the concepts that I've introduced. However, their behavior is a huge thing that makes things easier or harder for me and for them and for people around them. And it's not something that I can grade, but it's something that affects their grades kind of in a way most of the time. Whether they're absent from class isn't something that I mark, but it's something that will contribute to them having the full understanding of what we're doing or having enough time to do that thing or whatever. Anyway, in one aspect, just by being a teacher rather than a sub, as a sub, I'm not controlling their marks. That's not something that I do. I sometimes mark papers and mark things, but a teacher gives me a key, and it's not something that's like based off of my own judgment. It's like, these are definite answers. This is like math, and can you mark this stuff for me? Here's the key for that. This is the right answer. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So it's not me using my own judgment. But anyway, a student feels a certain amount of, I don't want to say responsibility, they understand the fact that, oh, okay, at the end of the day, the teacher's going to be marking this stuff. And that changes how students act sometimes for a teacher on a day-to-day basis, how they operate themselves in the classroom, how much work they do, how seriously they treat it, etc., etc., etc. As a sub, they don't do that a lot of the time. A lot of the time, students at any age, I find, and not every single student, but students in a class as a whole, treat that as just a free period to do whatever. Again, that also depends on the material the teacher has left for me as a sub. Because sometimes it's so involved that they have to do the stuff. Or we're watching a movie and there's no reason to be paying attention. Like, they can just watch the movie quietly, and in a lot of cases they do. But if it's like, hey, we have a worksheet to do, or like, you need to work on this assignment, if we just give you class time to work, it's a blessing and a curse. It all just depends on the class, the classroom culture, the culture of the school, all those things. It's not just grade level and age and the maturity that sometimes accompanies certain age ranges and their cognitive ability, but it also depends on the culture of the school and the classroom, because that influences the students as a whole. So sometimes when it's like, hey, we just have a work period, it's amazing because those students sometimes will actually use that work period. And there's no expectation for me to do anything in that time other than just, make sure that no fights break out or nobody dies. I don't know. Like, sometimes students just get quiet and they go to work. And even the ones that aren't working, or they take breaks from working or whatever, are quiet enough that other people can still do their work. They're not being disruptive, and therefore I don't have to say anything or do anything. Sometimes the students don't even need assistance with what they're doing. I kind of walk around and make sure, hey, does anyone have any questions? No, okay. I can read a book. I can do some writing. I can look for jobs. I can, engage in a conversation with a student if I feel like I'm not distracting them too much. I rarely ever do that though. But it gives me time to just be and exist, and that's when sometimes teachers say, I just need a warm body in the room, because you're not teaching them new content. They don't care how knowledgeable you are about the subject matter, because you're not doing anything. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to guide a student. You can do your best or whatever, but you just have to supervise, basically. It would be like supervising an exam. The expectation is that students can't ask you questions. You can't assist them. Someone says, can I go to the washroom? And then you say yes, or you escort them if it's an exam or whatever. And that's all you need to be there for, as just somebody that is, an authority figure, or not a minor or whatever, that is employed by the school district in order to just supervise and make sure no one's cheating, whatever. But your responsibilities are very low. However, sometimes you get a class when it's time for them to work and no one does any work, which was the case yesterday. Which was, we were given an hour and a half, because that's how long the classes were, to work, and they just didn't. And they just didn't, and they just didn't, and they just didn't. And it didn't matter how much I reminded them that they needed to do this work to set up for a project that was going to be starting the next day, or I went around and made sure that they were on task, and every time that I got, this was in a computer lab, like I said, I didn't want to get into too many specifics, but it kind of matters, because people just alt-tab back into they go from the game they were playing to the screen that has nothing on it, or like the website where they're supposed to be deep into this website researching and taking notes, and it's just on the home screen of that website. And I challenge students when I'm subbing, or any time, I guess when I was teaching too, very forward, and I say, just alt-tabbing whenever I come around isn't going to be useful to you. You aren't doing the work. That's obviously going to show. Your teacher's going to know that. But the thing is, this is where things fall apart. There's no consequence for that behavior. If I were to choose to just immediately send someone to the office or get them out of the classroom, that might send a message to the rest of the students. However, I don't do that often. I've actually only done it once. I've never sent a student to the office, but I have, as a sub, I have sent a student outside the classroom, and the first time I did that was only last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. That was the first time I'd ever done it. And it did help a little bit, because there were maybe half the class that was soon to be worthy of that same consequence, and they kind of adjusted their behavior a bit because they saw that I was willing to go that far. I don't like doing that, and I think maybe that's just a classroom management thing that I need to do more in order to set a certain standard and expectation. However, I mean, the expectation is also that it shouldn't get to that point because you're there to work, and that is the thing that I challenge students with when I'm teaching and when I'm subbing. I am not going to chase you down. If you leave and you skip, that's on you. Why do I care that you do that? You don't lose marks for skipping. I would mark you as absent or that you left early and you left at this time because that's an insurance thing. I mean, that's why we take attendance, basically, as a liability so that if something happens, I can say, yes, they were here the whole time. They couldn't have possibly committed that crime. They were in the classroom. I remember them being in the classroom. I marked them as in the classroom, and they were here the entire time. Or, actually, they left at 2:30. Oh, and someone, did something, vandalized something at 2:45. I guess it could have been them, because they weren't in the classroom. I don't have any idea of their whereabouts after they left. This is why we take attendance, okay? That's one huge reason. It's a liability thing, it's an insurance thing, and then we also can keep track of like, oh yeah, well of course you don't understand these concepts, you were gone 10 times, you were absent 10 times, you skipped 10 times in this unit or this month or whatever. So of course you're not going to have this understanding, and I can show that to your parent or guardian and say, yes, this is why they're doing poorly, they're just not here, and that matters. So that's another reason we keep track of things. So when students are challenged with, hey, you can skip, or when I'm teaching, in some cases it's like, why are you at school at all? When I get to know students for a long time and realize they have no interest in being there, and they're like, well, I have to be. And it's like, well, you don't have to be here because of me. So that's a discussion you can have with your parent or guardian or whatever, but you're not doing anyone any favors, you're making it difficult for everyone around you, etc. And people do that sometimes just in class while I'm subbing, and I challenge them with the same thing. Why are you here? Because, okay, well, if you're here to work, then, the only reason you should be here is if you're here to work, right? A lot of students obviously feel outside pressure to be in the classroom, and I understand that it's not something I want to oversimplify, but either you're here to work or you just shouldn't be here. That's, everyone has an off day, but when the off day is just because there's another human being in the room that's not your teacher, it's not a logical explanation. You've got time to work, use the time to work. And then if you are given another period to work and you finish that assignment, then you've got extra time. Great. I know this is not how a lot of teens or young adults or, children think about things, because sometimes a certain amount of cognitive ability isn't available yet, or the rationale isn't there. That's what's very frustrating for me. This is why I like working with older students, because they know and they are aware that I am not doing this thing. Therefore, I am the one in the wrong. I know that this is a reflection on me. There's a certain amount of responsibility I have, etc. But even grade 9s and 10s, sometimes that just doesn't compute. And the thing is that, again, there's no unless I'm to send them out of class or send them to the principal's office or whatever, there's no consequence that they feel is coming out of them acting poorly while I am there. And those days are really hard days. So when I am teaching, those days don't happen. I can't think of a day where I was teaching that the majority of the class or the whole class was so disruptive and loud, etc., that I just had a horrible day because of that. Sometimes I've had really bad days teaching just because there's a certain amount of groups that do something or whatever. It was just a different thing though. But those students know, again, that they're in your class, you have communication with their parents, you have communication directly with the principals, with the administration, with their other teachers, you are in somewhat control of their marks, which they may care about, and if they don't care about, there's a lot of things that could be consequences of their behavior, and they know that. Whereas when I'm subbing, there's no consequence. All I can do is write my sub notes to the teacher, really. I could take it as far as sending them to the principal, I could call the principal, it usually doesn't warrant that type of thing. But their classroom behavior in that moment, all I can do is write their names down, describe what happened, and usually there's nothing that happens after that, because what is a teacher going to do? Be like, don't do that again. That's it. Just don't do that. Why do you do that? If you're not here to work, but as for that one day, that's it. There's nothing that's going to come of that. The next day, the teacher might talk to them, and say, why were you behaving this way? Or to the whole class, in some cases, why were you avoiding work? I have here in my notes that the sub had attempted to get you to work multiple times. They continued to remind you as to the task you were supposed to be performing, blah, 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 blah. And then there was like, well, I just didn't. Like, no one has any answers, right? But what are they going to do? What is the teacher going to do? Send them all down to the office for a talking to? Well, a talking to is not going to do anything because they already know what they're doing is wrong, right? So, I mean, suspension and expulsion are real things, but I can't threaten them with that. I also can't really threaten them with anything unless I'm willing to follow through with it. And I can't tell them how their teacher is going to act because I don't know their teacher. I can't say, like, your teacher's really not going to like this, and if you do this X amount of times, then they're going to recommend you go to the principal or they're going to talk to your parents. No, I can't say any of that. It's empty and hollow, and if I'm ever there again, they know that. All I can do is, if it's extreme enough, is to send them to admin that day, and even that might not mean anything, because then they've got an excuse to skip. They might not make it to the principal's office, and I am not going to leave the whole class to escort them down to the principal's office. What am I going to have to do? Phone admin and tell them you're expecting this student? Like, that reflects a certain amount on me too if I do that frequently. And I don't find that it's warranted frequently. Anyway, I didn't want to go off the rails, and here I am. I feel like I'm getting really far away from the subject. But basically, I've told you what I really love about teaching, and that stuff doesn't really happen very often or at all when I am subbing. Subbing is more of just, it's a job, and it's nothing to do with my passion for teaching. It is so incredibly different. And the reason I say subbing is making me hate teaching, or subbing is making me fearful of teaching, is just because the amount of disrespect in the classroom that I sometimes get when I am subbing. Again, it comes down to classroom culture and other things. It is not every single grade 9 class or every single grade 10 class or whatever that makes me feel that way. Not at all. I'm not there enough to have a relationship established with students enough for them to even respect me. I don't have the same responsibilities to them. They don't have the same responsibilities to me. My role is incredibly different. There's so many things. And sometimes I sub and it's freaking amazing. And I had a great, fantastic day. I got to engage with students. We got to have some conversations. They were respectful. Sometimes students say thank you as they leave the classroom. And yesterday when students, there was one student who said goodbye as they left. Another student said thank you. And I couldn't even say anything back. Honestly, I just couldn't, because the words that were going to come out of my mouth were not nice. Because they were so, I don't think they were doing it to be snide, but they seemed to be so unaware of the trouble that they caused and the disruption and the anxiety and the stress. Like, despite the fact that I had to numerous times, I just had to patrol. I had to walk the classroom for an hour and a half just to make sure anyone was on task. And they wouldn't be on task unless I was standing right over them. And when I questioned them as to what they were doing, they would just not have answers. They would just pretend that I didn't even ask a question and basically ignore me. Or they'd laugh, they'd like nervous laughter, and not answer my question. And not do anything. And then until I stayed there, and then I would walk to someone else, and then they would go back to doing the other thing. It was just annoying, especially because I have different expectations of grade 9 students. Because I would expect that behavior more from grade 3 students or something else. I expect it from grade 9s from time to time, but it's a whole other thing. I'm rambling. It's just, that's the thing. I get fearful of the fact that, what if I'm in a classroom and this is just what happens? Man, I couldn't handle that if I had to. I have gone to some schools and I said I'll never go back to the school again. Period. And I haven't. Can't do it. Because sometimes the school culture is obviously so off the rails that I am convinced that any classroom I go into won't be any different than the classroom I was in the other day. It's just, just from hallway behavior, from other things that I see, even though I'm only in maybe that one classroom or two classrooms in that day for one teacher, it just seems to be like, this is nuts. This is absolutely just insane behavior that everyone's tolerating. There's no way that I can mentally, emotionally do this again. There was one time that I took a call and it was 2 days, and I'd never been to that school before. It was a middle school, and I had never, been there for that teacher before. And I knew within the first 2 hours that I wouldn't ever be able to go back to that school. And I went the second day because I already committed to it, and again, I need the money, and that's a poor position to be in. But I never took a call from that school again. And if it was like a 5-day or whatever thing, I don't know if I could do it. 2 days, at least I could see the end. I was over the hump at the end of the first day, but I mean, it was the end of the first day was it was just, I got a migraine headache both days. It was insane. It was just the loudest school, the most disrespectful group of students for that age group that I'd ever seen. And it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't like I was in fear for my life type of thing, which is, at some schools and some environments, that's a real concern. It wasn't like that. It was just so incredibly disrespectful and frustrating, and nothing could get done, and it was just constant battles all day that I just couldn't take it. And another teacher probably could, or another sub could handle that differently than me. I realized that some of this falls on me and not even wanting to do the necessary research and just try different approaches and all this stuff. Like, I have a certain style, and it's not that I necessarily want to stick with that style. I want to do what works. However, doing what works sometimes is also just a sacrifice of sincerity and genuineness and whatever. It's just a balance. It's just a whole thing. Again, I am rambling. But the fear is that I'm going to end up in a classroom that is like that for more than one day, for the semester. Like, I couldn't take that. So the fear is that students will act the same way with me being their teacher as they would when I'm subbing. That is the fear. That is when I say like, subbing is making me hate teaching, that would be why. Because I'm just like, man, I can't be in the classroom, like, because I can't get anything done. But I know the responsibilities and the roles of a teacher are so incredibly different than a sub. I'm going to end up repeating myself over and over and over again. To conclude, I'm still passionate about teaching, which is exactly why I am incredibly frustrated when I am subbing in really disrespectful classrooms, because I'm passionate about teaching, not about trying to babysit and getting people to do things they know they should be doing anyway, and failing to do that, because I can't make anyone do anything. And students know that, and that's okay to know that, but to continually challenge that in a way of, being incredibly disrespectful is a whole other thing. And you know what, that's it for me. We will see you on another time.